Certainly in my field of journalism, what we're seeing largely is old media being challenged by new media. So we see a lot of new sites, especially in the United States, sites like the Huffington Post. And BuzzFeed even has an investigative unit. We're also seeing 538 and Vox, more data-driven. And so what we're trying to do at ProPublica is, obviously we can't, because we're investigative journalism and it takes a long time, we can't compete with the speed of those sites. So what we do is long-form investigative stories that go to the heart of social issues. And we do that through a number of things. We have the world's best reporters who work for us. And then the other thing that we do very, very well, I would say, is our data analysis. So we are able to take data sets, government data sets, private data sets, document data sets, and analyze them and find the interesting, important stories within those data sets. And that's something that's really new with the speed of computers and the algorithms that we're able to use. Yeah, so it turns out that for companies that have to have a business model where they rely on advertising, which most journalism does, even print journalism, or subscribers, that investigative journalism is really, really expensive. In terms of, if you're looking at an investigative journalist for someone who's reporting on the police, or reporting on style, or a blogger who can post just a very quick analysis of today's events. Investigative stories that take years take multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it turns out that if that's all that you do, and you have a very good fundraising team, it's possible to do. I wouldn't say it's cheap, but it's on the cheaper side when you compare us to teams like the New York Times, or even in Europe, Le Monde, or The Guardian. And so what we're able to do is we're able to approach funders and say, this is important work, we're changing the world. And by and large, they're willing to pour some money into it. Yeah, so we're funded by the Sandler Foundation. We were founded by the Sandler Foundation. Herb Sandler, who used to work in banking, approached our old editor who came from the Wall Street Journal, Paul Steiger, and said, investigative newsrooms are dying in the United States, which by and large they are, because newspapers are not growing at all, even with the advent of more online presence. And said it's important to have a watchdog of the press in the United States and the world abroad to put a check and balance against power. And Herb Sandler thought that was a great idea, funded us in full for the first couple of years. We very quickly realized that having a single funder was not good business-wise, right? We weren't going to be able to maybe survive if he decided to stop funding us for whatever reason. So we quickly diversified. We get a bunch of funding from the MacArthur Foundation, a bunch of money from the Knight Foundation. The MacArthur Foundation is an arts and sciences program in the United States. They give out grants to artists. They gave us a big grant for being an innovative institution. The Knight Foundation is a foundation set up by James Knight, who was a philanthropist and owned the Knight-Ridder papers in the United States, and they fund journalism innovation in the United States. So they have this thing called the Knight News Challenge, which gets computing and computational methods into journalism. Because we're an investigative news organization, and because we have the ability to wait until our story is done, until we found the real root cause of the problem, it's a really freeing experience. You're not working on 4 other stories that you have to publish for today's paper. You're working on one big story that you're hoping at the end of the day will move the needle to make the world a better place. Usually we're working on 2 or 3 things at a time. Sometimes waiting for FOIA requests, Freedom Information Act requests from the government, or trying to find that particular source that's going to, tell our story really well, or doing data analysis. But I would say for the bigger stories, not the day stories or the stories that are kind of small, the ones we call deep dives, those take anywhere from 8 months to a year. So if you look at my author page on ProPublica, I have only a handful of stories that I've ever been bylined on, and that's because I do stories with lots of data, lots of investigation, stories that take years and have me traveling away from home months at a time. We have a world-class social media team who who does everything from finding sources for reporters to their own crowdsourced investigations. They've created a patient harm community, so patients who have been harmed by doctors in the United States, and that's 2,000 people that we're mining for sources. We also do something innovative within the news space that not a lot of people do, where for every one of our big stories that has data associated, we create what's called a news application, which is an online application, an online website that allows the reader to find themselves within the data, find their own personal story. So if it's about schools, how segregated is my school, for example, or if it's about about pharmaceutical companies, we have a lookup tool so you can see how much pharmaceutical companies are paying your doctor. If it's about surgeons or healthcare providers, you can look up and see how like your healthcare provider, how normal your healthcare provider is, or if they're strange and they're prescribing you strange drugs. And we do that to accompany our stories, and sometimes those news applications become their own story. So in Dollars for Docs example, the story is the news application. We put up all of these pharmaceutical payments to doctors, which may or may not be a conflict of interest. If your doctor is getting paid to prescribe you a particular drug in the United States, then maybe they're not picking the drug that's correct for you. We have done in the past international stories. So we did a story in Guatemala about a massacre in Guatemala that played really well. We did a story with The Guardian based off the Edward Snowden documents, which obviously has worldwide implications. But for us, because our expertise is America, 99% of our stories are going to be in America. And that probably is for a lack of resources. I think at a certain point we'll have to expand to Europe just because it's equally as important as the United States, right? If not more so. We just don't have the experience right now. We're all of the older reporters are born and bred in American newsrooms. So I'd say, ProPublica technically is a startup. It is a weird startup in that it's a nonprofit startup. But I would say be the best at what you do, right? And that's an easy thing to say, but it took us a couple years before we won the Pulitzer Prize, and a lot of work and a lot of stress. And also, if you're going to try and be the best at what you do, you really have to dig deep and find the people that are going to make a magic place to work at. You can't skimp in those early days. When you're first starting out, you really, really, really need to do your research and make sure you come out on top.